16-year-old Lady Jane Grey reigned as England's queen for just 9 days in July 1553 before being imprisoned in the Tower of London and executed 7 months later, manipulated by powerful nobles who proclaimed her queen following Edward VI's death. Lady Jane became a political pawn in Protestant Catholic power struggles. Contemporary accounts describe her execution with haunting detail. Blindfolded, she panic-stricken couldn't locate the execution block, reaching desperately until the executioner guided her hands. Her final words affirm Protestant faith. "Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit." Her headless body remained on display for hours as warning against challenging royal succession. Her youth and obvious manipulation by adults has rendered her, the 9 days queen, a sympathetic figure across 5 centuries. The stonefish, Cynincea species, has perfected deadly camouflage over millions of evolutionary years. Its mottled brown-gray exterior mimics surrounding coral and rocky seafloors along Indo-Pacific coastlines. 13 dorsal spines contain venom glands that inject toxin when pressure activated, often by unsuspecting human feet. The neurotoxin causes immediate excruciating pain described as being hit by a sledgehammer, followed by muscle weakness, heart arrhythmia, and potential respiratory paralysis. Without prompt treatment using hot water immersion and anti-venom, victims can die within hours. The venom's complex protein structure remains incompletely understood, despite causing dozens of hospitalizations annually, making this master of disguise justifiably feared by coastal communities throughout its range. Victorian-era bone collection emerged as a macabre hobby among 19th-century European elites. Wealthy collectors acquired human skulls and skeletal remains through grave robbing, colonial expeditions, and medical school connections. Craniums were categorized by race, gender, and supposed criminal tendencies, following pseudo-scientific phrenology principles. These collections filled curiosity cabinets and drawing rooms, often displayed alongside taxidermy and geological specimens. The practice particularly targeted indigenous remains from colonized territories. Australian Aboriginal skulls commanded premium prices in London auction houses. This collecting habit reflected Victorian fascination with mortality and scientific racism, commodifying human remains as exotic curiosities rather than acknowledging their humanity. Many modern museum collections originated from these problematic Victorian acquisitions. Agori sadhus, extreme ascetics within Hinduism, perform cannibalistic rituals that transgress fundamental Indian taboos. Smearing themselves with cremation ash and meditating atop corpses, they consume human flesh from bodies floating in the Ganges River, particularly during the Kumbh Mela festival. They drink from human skulls, kapala, and craft ritual implements from human bones. These practices aim to transcend conventional distinctions between sacred and profane by embracing death's reality. With fewer than 100 true practitioners, their extreme asceticism challenges mainstream Hindu sensibilities while pursuing spiritual liberation through ritual pollution. Their practices derive from ancient Kapali traditions dating to 700 CE that viewed breaking social taboos as paths to enlightenment. Cenotes, natural limestone sinkholes filled with groundwater, served as Maya portals to Xibalba, the underworld. At sites like Chichen Itza, ceremonial sacrifices involved throwing living victims into these sacred wells during drought periods to appease rain deities. Archaeological excavations have recovered human remains, with forensic evidence of ritual preparation. Skulls showing blunt force trauma, bound limbs, and hearts removed before immersion. Children were particularly valued offerings, with skeletal remains, showing nutritional manipulation before death. These sacrificial practices peaked during environmental stress periods, revealing how climate pressures intensified religious practices. Recovered artifacts include jade offerings, copal incense burners, and gold objects that accompanied the human sacrifices into the watery underworld. In 1982, archaeologists discovered a woman's skeleton on Herculaneum's ancient beach, preserved in a position of profound agony. Unlike Pompeii's victims who suffocated under ash, Herculaneum residents faced a different fate when Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE. The volcano's pyroclastic surge reached temperatures of 932 degrees Fahrenheit, instantly vaporizing body fluids and flash cooking internal organs. This woman died in a pose of desperate agony, mouth open in a final scream, hands clawed, body arched backward in a position called pugilistic attitude that results from muscle contraction in extreme heat. Her remains provide crucial scientific evidence of how pyroclastic surges kill within seconds, while preserving a moment of human terror frozen in time. The chupacabra, goatsucker, emerged in 1995 when Puerto Rican farmer Madeline Tolentino reported livestock killed with precise puncture wounds, completely drained of blood. Described as a bipedal reptilian creature with spinal quills, glowing red eyes, and fangs, the entity sparked mass hysteria across Latin America as similar attacks occurred. Hundreds of farm animals died mysteriously, typically with blood removed through small incisions. While scientific investigation attributes most cases to coyotes with severe mange or other predators, the legend persists as a modern cryptid. Notably, chupacabra sightings coincided with the release of the science fiction film Species, suggesting how contemporary fears merge with traditional folklore to create modern monsters. Rusalki in Slavic mythology represented the vengeful spirits of women who died unnaturally near water, particularly unmarried drowning victims and self-harm cases. These beautiful, pale-skinned entities emerged during Rusalia Week, early June, when they would sit in riverside trees combing their perpetually wet hair. Despite their alluring appearance, Rusalki harbored murderous intent, luring male passers-by with enchanting songs before dragging them underwater to share their fate. Villages near forests and lakes observed protective rituals, wearing wormwood and carrying protective symbols during danger periods. The folklore reflected cultural anxieties about proper burial and the dangers of untamed natural spaces, particularly for young men traveling alone. The Bola cyclone of November 1970 struck Bangladesh, then East Pakistan, with apocalyptic force, creating the 20th century's deadliest natural disaster. The storm's 150-mile-per-hour winds generated a 35-foot storm surge that overwhelmed low-lying coastal regions at midnight, giving sleeping villagers no warning. Entire island communities disappeared underwater, bodies washed ashore for weeks afterward, while survivors clung to trees for days, without food or clean water. The official death toll reached 300,000, though estimates range to 500,000 or higher. The disaster's mismanagement by West Pakistani authorities fueled Bangladesh's independence movement, showing how natural catastrophes can reshape nations' political destinies. The Peshtigo Fire of October 8, 1871 remains America's deadliest forest fire despite being overshadowed by Chicago's blaze the same night. A perfect storm of drought, logging debris, and cyclonic winds created a fire tornado exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit that consumed northeastern Wisconsin. The inferno moved so quickly that many victims died mid-escape, found later on roads with melted metal possessions beside them. Others suffocated from superheated air before flames reached them. Some survived only by immersing in the Peshtigo River, watching helplessly as family members perished on shore. The disaster killed at least 1,500 people, possibly over 2,500, and burned 1.2 million acres, yet remains largely forgotten in American disaster history. The 27 Club represents a macabre phenomenon of influential musicians dying at precisely 27 years old. While popularized after Kurt Cobain's 1994 self-harm, the pattern began earlier with Brian Jones, 1969, Jimi Hendrix, 1970, Janis Joplin, 1970, and Jim Morrison, 1971, all dying within 2 years through various causes including OD and drowning. Amy Winehouse's 2011 death renewed interest in this statistical anomaly. While scientific studies find no heightened mortality specifically at 27, the age represents a vulnerable period when early fame, substance abuse, and mental health challenges often converge. The phenomenon reveals how celebrity pressures can accelerate self-destructive behaviors in creative individuals. The Poltergeist film trilogy, 1982 to 1988, became notorious for cast member deaths, fueling curse rumors that persist today. 4 actors died during or shortly after production. Dominique Dunne, strangled by her boyfriend. Julian Beck, stomach cancer. Will Sampson, post-operative kidney failure. And 12-year-old Heather O'Rourke, septic shock from misdiagnosed intestinal stenosis. The curse legend intensified when it emerged that real human skeletons were used as props in the swimming pool scene, a common but unsettling Hollywood practice before synthetic alternatives became available. While medical experts see only tragic coincidences, the film's exploration of disturbed burial grounds created an eerie parallel to the production's troubling mortality rate. In October 1918, the U.S. 77th Division's Lost Battalion became trapped in France's Argonne forest when German forces encircled them. As supplies dwindled over 6 days, their worst casualties came from American artillery. Despite using carrier pigeons to communicate their position, miscalculations caused American shells to rain down on their own men. Major Charles Whittlesey refused evacuation offers, reportedly responding, "Go to hell," to German surrender demands. Of 554 men who entered the forest, 197 died from friendly fire, enemy action, and starvation before rescue arrived. The survivors' ordeal became a testament to American perseverance amid the tragic fog of war. Mustard gas transformed WWI battlefields into chemical nightmares after German forces first deployed it near Ypres in 1917. The oily substance caused delayed symptoms. Soldiers initially noticed only a mustard-like smell before developing enormous fluid-filled blisters hours later as the chemical burned through skin, eyes, and lung tissue. Unlike chlorine gas, no effective gas mask existed against it. Victims suffered excruciating deaths or survived with permanent blindness and scarred lungs that caused lifelong respiratory distress. The weapon's humanitarian impact directly influenced the 1925 Geneva Protocol, banning chemical warfare, though many nations continued stockpiling it through World War II. Japanese kamikaze pilots penned final letters called Jisei before their self-harm missions during World War II's Pacific Theater. These preserved documents reveal young men, many just teenagers, grappling with their imminent deaths. They often expressed patriotic duty alongside personal regrets about parents who would never see them again, or siblings they'd never watch grow up. Over 3,900 pilots died in these missions, with psychological preparation including ceremonial cups of sake and headbands inscribed with rising sun symbols. Museums in Chiran, Japan, now preserve these letters, offering insight into individuals caught between personal desires for life and cultural expectations of sacrificial death for emperor and nation. The Bone Wars between paleontologists Edward Cope and Othniel Marsh, 1877 to 1892, advanced dinosaur discovery at tremendous human cost. Their reckless competition for fossils led workers to use dynamite to quickly extract specimens, causing numerous injuries and several deaths from explosions and cave-ins. Fossil sites were destroyed in haste, with irreplaceable specimens shattered beyond scientific value. Workers labored in dangerous conditions without safety equipment, suffering injuries from falling rocks and collapsing excavation walls. Despite discovering nearly 136 new dinosaur species between them, the rivals' unethical practices established a dark precedent in early paleontological work that took decades to reform. Early anesthesia in the 1840s represented both medical breakthrough and deadly gamble. Without standardized dosing or monitoring equipment, surgeons administered ether and chloroform by pouring liquid onto cloth masks, estimating doses by patient response. OD caused respiratory arrest and cardiac failure, while insufficient amounts left patients conscious during procedures. Hannah Greener, a 15-year-old girl, became chloroform's first documented fatality in 1848 when her heart stopped during a toenail removal. These tragedies prompted the development of precision vaporizers, specialized training, and eventually the establishment of anesthesiology as a medical specialty, saving countless future lives through standardized protocols. Bloodletting killed thousands under the guise of healing throughout history. Physicians extracted pints of blood to balance bodily humors, often leaving patients weaker or dead. George Washington's death in 1799 illustrates this tragedy. After developing a throat infection, doctors removed nearly 40% of his blood within 24 hours. Despite his weakening condition, they continued the treatment. Washington died that night, likely from hypovolemic shock, rather than his original illness. The practice remained standard until the mid-1800s, when Pierre-Louis' statistical studies finally proved bloodletting's deadly ineffectiveness, marking an early triumph of evidence-based medicine over tradition. In 1948, 11-year-old Martha Mason contracted polio during a local outbreak that also killed her brother. The virus paralyzed her from the neck down, forcing her to live in an 800-pound iron lung respirator that mechanically forced her lungs to breathe. Despite her confinement, Mason graduated high school as valedictorian and earned a college degree through intercom classes. Using a voice-activated computer and mirror system to see behind her, she wrote her autobiography, Breath, and hosted community gatherings in her home. Her iron lung required constant maintenance as parts became obsolete. Mason lived 61 years in the machine until her death in 2009. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was in Hiroshima on business when the first atomic bomb detonated on August 6, 1945, less than 2 miles from Ground Zero. Despite severe burns, he returned to his hometown of Nagasaki, where he experienced the second bombing on August 9th. While explaining his Hiroshima ordeal to his disbelieving supervisor, Yamaguchi suffered acute radiation sickness but survived both catastrophic events, the only person officially recognized by Japan as a Niju Hibakusha, double bomb survivor. Despite his exposure to radiation, he lived to age 93, advocating for nuclear disarmament and detailing his experiences in his memoir, Twice Bombed, Twice Survived. Mary Mallon, America's first identified asymptomatic typhoid carrier, infected at least 51 people while working as a cook for wealthy New York families from 1900 to 1915. Authorities first detained her in 1907 after epidemiologist George Soper traced multiple outbreaks to her employment history. Released in 1910 after promising not to cook professionally, she changed her name and continued working, causing more infections. Her second capture in 1915 led to permanent quarantine on North Brother Island, where she lived in isolation for 23 years until her death in 1938. Laboratory tests confirmed she carried typhoid bacteria in her gallbladder, a condition that surgical removal might have cured. From May 1918 to October 1919, New Orleans residents lived in terror as the Axemen broke into homes using chisels to remove door panels, then attacked sleeping victims with their own axes. On March 13, 1919, newspapers published his letter promising to spare anyone playing jazz music the following Tuesday. That night, the city's dance halls overflowed while homes blasted jazz from phonographs. The killer specifically targeted Italian grocers, leading to theories about mafia connections or anti-Italian sentiment. Despite massive police efforts, including the detention of over 100 suspects, the case went cold. The attacks stopped as mysteriously as they began. Between 1935 and 1938, Cleveland's Kingsbury Run area became hunting grounds for a methodical killer who decapitated and dismembered at least 12 victims, possibly up to 20. The perpetrator demonstrated surgical precision, often removing limbs at joints while victims were still alive. Most victims were unidentified transients, making investigation nearly impossible. Safety Director Elliot Ness ordered shantytown raids and personally interviewed a primary suspect, a physician with dissection skills who later committed himself to a mental institution. Despite the largest investigation in Cleveland history, with 1,500 people interviewed, the killer's identity remains unknown. Modern DNA testing of preserved tissue has yielded no matches. Elizabeth Short's murder on January 15, 1947, featured signature elements that still baffle investigators. Her body was found drained of blood, surgically bisected at the waist, with precision suggesting medical knowledge. The killer had washed the corpse clean and posed it in a vacant lot. Short's face bore a Glasgow smile, cuts extending from the corners of her mouth to her ears. In the days following the discovery, the killer taunted police by mailing Short's personal belongings and a note constructed from newspaper clippings. Despite interviewing over 150 suspects and compiling a 5,000-page case file, the LAPD never identified her killer. When Marilyn Monroe was found dead on August 4, 1962, numerous inconsistencies clouded the investigation. Her housekeeper changed testimony multiple times about finding the body, while police noted the absence of a drinking glass for taking pills. The coroner found advanced rigor mortis inconsistent with the timeline provided. Phone records showed calls to Peter Lawford and the Justice Department shortly before her death. The initial medical examiner, Thomas Noguchi, noted bruising and a puncture wound suggesting injection, though no needle was found. Monroe's ties to both President Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, who possibly visited her that day, fueled decades of conspiracy theories. Following Rome's devastating fire in 64 CE, Emperor Nero diverted blame from himself to the city's Christian minority. According to the historian Tacitus, Christians were covered in animal skins and torn apart by dogs, crucified or turned into human torches to light Nero's gardens at night. This persecution represented the first documented state action against Christians. Archaeological evidence from the period corroborates accounts of mass executions, with charred human remains discovered near the imperial gardens. This scapegoating inadvertently strengthened the Christian movement, as believers revered these martyrs and spread accounts of their steadfast faith amid horrific torture. The U.S. Army's 23rd Headquarters Special Troops deployed inflatable tanks, sound effects, and fake radio transmissions to deceive German forces during World War II. This unit of artists, designers, and sound engineers created phantom divisions of up to 30,000 imaginary soldiers using just 1,100 men. Their operations in Europe, including the critical Rhine River deception, may have saved thousands of Allied lives. These soldiers carried weapons for self-defense, but relied primarily on illusion, sometimes positioning themselves dangerously close to enemy lines. Their existence remained classified until 1996, with many members taking their extraordinary wartime service to their graves. Several Egyptian mummies have been discovered with their mouths open in apparent screams, most famously, Unknown Man E at the Cairo Museum. Found in 1886, this royal mummy showed signs of extreme agony at death. Forensic analysis revealed possible poisoning or live burial, as his hands and feet were bound with leather straps and his face contorted in anguish. The resin in his mouth indicates he may have consumed poison, possibly as punishment for a royal conspiracy. This screaming mummy phenomenon has been documented in several other Egyptian tombs, suggesting these individuals experienced traumatic deaths.